Hi friends! So a few months ago, I did a video trying out some coloring techniques that were flooding my social media. I actually had a lot of fun with that, and some of you let me know what sort of techniques you wanted to see. I am keeping a list of all of those, but someone also mentioned using other types of supplies, not just alcohol markers. So for this video, I wanted to find some really cool ways of coloring that you can do with just about any medium. Okay, so the first one that we're going to talk about is this embroidery technique. And this is basically a way of coloring that makes the finished product look like an embroidered patch. So to start, I am going to show you how to do it in alcohol marker because that's how I learned. But then I'm going to try a bunch of different mediums to see if we can adapt it. I'm going to use Creative Paula's coloring book for this because I already have it and I love it. And the best pages for this technique are ones with big, bold focal points. This page would actually be even better if there was no background at all, so that it could really look like a patch, but I also wanted a really large page so that I would be able to demonstrate. For coloring, I like to use a color palette to help me pick out colors, because sometimes I get paralyzed by having to make too many decisions, so this just helps me narrow it down a bit. I am not, however, going to be using this palette that I chose, because I'm a real dummy and I only just now realized that these are not carrots. They're rocks. Why did I think that this was a picture of a butterfly on top of a stack of carrots? Were my eyes even open? So obviously, this palette that I specifically chose for the orange and the green is not going to work. Please hold while I go pick a new palette. Okay, I'm back, and I have a new card. So let's get into this. The first thing that I'm going to do is draw some lines across my paper. This is not required, you could really just eyeball it, but I don't trust myself to keep my lines straight and even, so I'm going to put down some very light pencil lines. These are maybe 1.5 inches apart, but you could do them however far apart looks good to you. Now, for each section that you're going to color, you're going to need 3 different shades of the same color. A light version, a mid-tone, and a darker shade. I'm starting with the lightest shade, and I'm filling in the whole section. I've talked in other videos about how to fill in alcohol marker without it getting all streaky, but for this technique, it does not matter. It's going to get very crowded, and no one is going to notice. Now, after letting that layer dry for a few minutes, I'm going to go back in with the same light shade and draw lines across the section. This is why I drew my pencil lines. And this is just going to break down my large section into smaller sections. These lines can actually go in any direction as long as they're parallel to each other, and you'll see later when I work on the butterfly that I make some of the lines going up and down. I just actually like the look of them going straight across. After those lines are done, we're going to take our mid-tone and we're going to make a bunch of strokes in each of the smaller sections, going from the bottom of the section about halfway up. The strokes do not all have to be the same length, and it actually looks better if it's sort of loose and random. We just want to fill in each smaller section with these upward strokes. Then we're going to take the darkest marker and do the same thing, making upward strokes from the bottom of each section, but we're only going to go about halfway up those mid-tone strokes, or about 1/4 of the way up from the bottom of the section. Again, we're keeping it loose and sort of random. Now, we need to add the part where the light would hit each thread. So we're going to take a white colored pencil with a very sharp point and make lines coming from the top of each section. These are going to go about halfway down and overlap that mid-tone marker. These strokes are going to be a little less dense than the alcohol marker ones. Also, try to keep the pencil fairly sharp so the lines are really fine. Alright, we are halfway there now. This is a very long technique. So then, we're going to take a colored pencil in the same color as your markers, but darker than even the darkest marker. In this case, I'm using a very dark gray, and I'm going to make strokes from the bottom up, but these are going to be the most spaced out and the most random yet. all different lengths, spread out really far. This is just sort of adding a bit of shadow and breaking up all of that white. Then, you're going to take a white, well, everybody I've seen said gel pen, but I can't get those to work over pencil, so I'm going to use a white paint marker, and one more time, I'm going to make strokes from the top down. You can add as many as you want, but I kind of like them spaced out and scattered. Honestly, depending on how much white is already showing, you could even skip this step. After all of that, there is one more thing that we're going to do to really finish this off and make it look embroidered. But first, I'm going to go back and fill in the rest of the sections using the same steps as before. Starting with the lightest color as a fill, drawing lines to create sections, adding strokes in the medium color, adding strokes in the darkest color, adding light with a white colored pencil, adding shadows with a dark colored pencil, and then adding highlights with a white paint marker. You can see why I suggested pages with one main focal point, because this can be very time consuming. I'm doing this whole page so that you can really see what I'm doing, but I don't think it looks as good as some of the smaller ones that I'm going to show you later. My eyes are just overwhelmed. I do actually really love this technique though, and I'm really excited about all of the techniques that I'm going to show you. Coloring is such great practice for learning aspects of art like light and shadow and color theory, but it used to be so stressful to me because I was overwhelmed and I didn't know where to start. So finding these techniques has really helped me to narrow my focus a bit more and really develop a passion for coloring. And speaking of developing a passion, let's take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, Craftsy. If you don't know who they are, Craftsy is an online learning community where makers and creatives can advance their skills and learn some new ones. Craftsy has over 2,000 classes in categories like drawing, painting, sewing, knitting, photography, baking, and even fitness. I love that they have classes for all different skill levels and styles. Like this Ins and Outs of Embroidery class by Jessica Giardino, so I could take my 2D art and make something 3D. Or I might even find something intriguing that I never expected, like this Learning How to Make a Cookie Bouquet with Maddie Gartman. Any craft that involves eating at the end is a craft for me. I would love for you to experience Craftsy with me, so the first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description or scan the QR code will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. That's $1.49 for an entire year of classes. This is valid for new members only. Thank you so much to Craftsy for sponsoring this video. Now back to this embroidery page. After we've finished each section, being careful not to skip around too much and forget steps like I kept doing, I went back in and ran an eraser over the outlines. Not really because it was showing up too much, but I'm going to use a fine liner over the outlines, and it doesn't really like to draw over pencil that well. They don't really get along, so this is just a little bit of couples therapy for them. Now, what we're going to do is take a black fine liner, doesn't really matter what size, and we're going to make a ton of zigzaggy lines back and forth over the whole black outline. This is like that embroidery outline. I'm not being too careful to make them all the same exact length. A tiny bit of variation makes it look more like thread. Then, to really add a bit of realism, I'm going to put some little dangly threads here and there. That's my favorite part. The last thing that I'm going to do is add some white highlight strokes with a white gel pen or paint marker. Gel pen and fine liner get along pretty well, so it's fine to use a gel pen for this. And that's the completed page. Again, this is not my favorite because it's just too much to look at, and it would be really cute if the colors were better, but this was just so that we can get the technique down. Next, we're going to try out all different media with this technique. Okay, I'm going to switch to Creative Paula's second coloring book, Loved, for this because I wanted this page. It has a lot of smaller, separate pictures that I can do with different media. First, I'm going to start with water-based markers. And this time, I decided instead of doing a full layer of the lightest color, Instead, I'm just going to do strokes of that color from the top about halfway down. I wanted to test this out and see if it has any noticeable difference. Spoiler alert, not really. Since I don't actually have that many water-based markers, I had to make do with what I do have, so the darkest gray is actually way darker than the medium and lightest colors. That's also why the cherry is pink instead of red. But it's okay because once I add in the dark pencil strokes, it's not as noticeable. I also did add the white pencil strokes on this one, but I'm not actually sure that it's necessary with the white of the paper showing through. The rest of the technique, though, I followed the same as the first page that I did. Next, I tested out some colored fine liners. Obviously, I eliminated that first base layer again and just used the lightest color to make downward strokes. Then the medium and darkest colors to make the upward strokes. I skipped the white pencil since there was already so much white showing through, and then I eliminated another step, and instead of the dark pencil, I just used the darkest fine liner and made some longer strokes here and there. I also skipped the highlights with the white paint marker. I'm really just abandoning the whole technique I just showed you. I did do the black ziggy-zaggies and the white highlights on it though. For this mouse, who is absolutely wrecked from eating too much apple, I'm going to try out some paint markers. I followed the same steps as the fine liners, skipping the colored pencil layers, but I did add back in the highlights with a white paint marker. I'm not sure how much of the original technique was overkill, or how much I'm just tired of drawing strokes. But it's all for science. I have to test this out, or my brain won't rest. Okay, the last medium I tried was colored pencils. I did this the same as the paint markers, light downward strokes, medium strokes upward, dark strokes upward, white highlights with a paint marker, black ziggy-zaggies, loose threads, and white highlights. After all of these little mice were done, I added a gray shadow with a marker just to really try to make them look like little patches. So that's all of them. There are 5 mice on this page, but I could only think of 4 other mediums to test, so this guy gets no love today. If you can think of another medium I should test, let me know and he'll become a real boy. Which medium do you think came out best? Really, I can't tell. I've been staring at them for too long. Okay, for the next technique, I am going to add a warning here. If you have epilepsy that's sensitive to certain visual stimuli, you might want to skip this portion of the video. This technique is the glitch technique. I love this because it looks so cool and complicated, but it's actually pretty easy and much faster than the embroidery technique. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use this little grabby coloring book that came with their alcohol markers. Because in my opinion, the glitch technique looks best on one lone object, or like something centered on the page versus a whole page. And for this, I'm only going to need 2 colors with a pretty high contrast. So I picked a magenta and a bright blue. I'm going to use the fine tip side instead of the brush tips because I want a fairly even line width, and that's a little harder to do with a brush tip. The easiest picture to practice this on is one with lines at an angle or rounded bumps because we want to determine a right and a left side of each line. Since this camera has a lot of horizontal lines, I'm going to come back to it later, so instead let's do this tree. Starting with the pink marker, I'm going to add a line to the left of every black line. So on the humps near the top, I'm only going to line the side of the arch that's on the left. I'm making sure that I'm doing this on the inside and the outside of each outline. I do have some perfectly horizontal lines down here, which I tried doing half and half, and I'm not really a fan of that. So you'll see later on that I just kind of pick the top or the bottom as my left side, and then I just make sure to stick with it for the whole picture. Now for the blue, I'm going to draw a line to the right of each outline. Once the first color is done, this part should be pretty quick because it will just be the opposite of wherever the pink lines are. Basically, every black line on this picture should be fully outlined on both sides. After the outlining is done, we're going to take our 2 markers and draw some horizontal lines coming out from the new outlines that we made. So all of the blue lines will come out to the right, and all of the pink lines will come out to the left. You can make them all different lengths and add as many as you like. They do need to be horizontal though, which I'm not great at. Straight lines are not my forte, so it probably would be a good idea to grab a ruler. I didn't do that, but it would be a great idea. I did decide to fatten the lines up to help straighten them, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But once all of those lines are done, the last step is to take a white gel pen or paint marker and make lots of horizontal white lines across the page. And I mean lots of white lines. All different lengths, some completely crossing the outlines, some stopping in the middle of them. The ends aren't super visible against the bare paper. It's more about interrupting the black and pink and blue. And that's it. Doesn't it look cool? I am obsessed with this technique. So on to other media. Don't judge the pages that I choose, it's just for demonstration purposes. First, I'm going to try out some paint markers, and I did the exact same steps as the alcohol markers, except for choosing different colors, obviously. And I went back over the black outlines before I did the horizontal lines, because the paint markers are just a little too opaque, and they covered some of the black, making it look kind of uneven and sloppy. I do, however, like that the paint markers go over the black outlines when making those horizontal lines, because that just makes it look way glitchier and cool. I tried some cheap water-based markers on this duck. And then colored pencils on that camera. You can see that I changed how I did the horizontal outlines on this one, and I like the look of that much better. I'm not a fan of the colored pencils that I chose though. I used some cheap rose art colored pencils, and I think it would have looked better with much more vibrant ones like Prismacolor. Last, I tried gel pens. I did these instead of the fine liners because I thought maybe the lines would be thicker, and they're still pens. But the gel pens ended up not wanting to work well, even after hanging out in my cleavage for a while. Warming up gel pens usually makes them flow better, but this blue was not having it, so it came out a little bit streaky. But that's all of them now. What do you think? Which version do you like best? Okay, so I actually did 2 more techniques, but since I went overboard and did 5 pictures for each, I ran out of time in editing. So you'll have to come back next week to see the neon and glitter techniques. What do you think? What other technique should I try? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.